I'm Devra. I am a food and farm business coach with Business Impact Northwest, and also was involved in founding several co-ops like Patty Pan Cooperative and also New Day Cooperative Distribution during COVID. And I'll be presenting, so you'll hear a lot more from me.
Hey everybody, my name is Kaleb. I'm a cooperative developer with the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. I service Tacoma and Seattle. I have a background in urban co-op organizing, so I've done a lot of inner city grassroots work, and I'm here to talk about our case.
Hi everyone, I'm Cheryl. I am a cooperative attorney, and I have my own practice called People's Community Law. I have been a co-op member and enthusiast for many, many years before I was an attorney. Started a co-op daycare center when my son was like 2. Now he's almost 30. And I worked at legal aid for many years and didn't really kind of see the connection. I loved co-ops, but I never kind of thought of it in terms of legal needs. And a couple of years ago, I really started to see that we're getting some traction with co-ops, being noticed and spreading, and that there was very little legal help for folks. And so I decided to move in that direction and have been building this practice for the last couple of years across a number of different types of co-ops. So we'll talk about that more.
And next up, Mike Seo. Mike, a quick intro, we can give a little bit more later.
Yeah, my name is Mike. I'm a share capital co-op. We are an investment fund that invests in co-ops of any kind. So if you're interested in supporting yourself with co-op, we can talk about how you can borrow some money to buy a business or get some more capital. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to watch right now. Before Devra gets started, do you want to move up to the hot seat? Not that it's kind of playing. And that way, once Devra's finished, down the line, you can hear your presentation. Can everybody hear okay now that that is off? Yeah. Hopefully that stays mostly. Just holler, raise your hand if we need any adjustments or changes. We have some fresh fruit and coffee. Please feel free to grab some at any point if you want to run back and grab some of that. I'll leave it to Devra.
Okay, so I'm going to try to do this sitting down, and if it seems like I should be standing up, I'll stand up. But topics we're going to cover today. So, of course, what is a co-op? Types of co-ops. I know we mentioned a lot of different types of co-ops that people here are involved in. Why do you want to start one? A little bit about legal structures. Difference between a co-op and an ESOP, because it's something that I think there's a lot of confusion around. Conversion co-ops, which is taking an existing business and making it into a co-op. Challenges and next steps. The presentation is geared towards kind of an overview of all types of co-ops, but I'll be, I think, focusing more on worker co-ops because it seemed from conversations with Mariah that was where the interest was here. So what is a co-op? This definition, the Autonomous Association of Persons United Voluntarily, that's from the International Cooperative Alliance. The second section here, the one member, one vote, and patronage compensation based on participation rather than ownership percentage, those are from basically a case that went to the Supreme Court in the late 50s, early 60s with a cooperatively owned timber company here in the Northwest. And there are certain tax advantages you get for being a co-op, like primarily you're exempt from double taxation. The IRS didn't like where they were going with it, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and that ruling involved defining, like creating these criteria for what legally makes a co-op, And what's interesting to me about these two criteria is the difference between them and, say, corporate shareholder arrangements. So you have one member, one vote in a co-op. With a corporate shareholding arrangement, the more shares you own, the more votes you have. So if you own 51% of a stock in a company, then you have a majority vote right off the bat. And then the patronage compensation, patronage is another word for profit. Profit's kind of a dirty word in co-op circles, so we call it patronage. And it's based on how much you participate rather than how much you own. And again, there's that difference between co-op patronage and paying out and the way that corporations do it, where it's based on how much you own. My own definition of a co-op is it has to do with a group of people forming an entity to collaboratively and democratically solve a problem. So the types of co-ops, worker co-op, the workers are the owners, and the problem that's being solved there is inequities in pay structures and kind of a zero-sum game between employers and employees. With consumer co-ops, it's people pooling purchasing power on an individual level to make available the kind of product that they want to shop for. So REI, PCC, those are, some bigger consumer co-ops. There are plenty of smaller ones. Now, purchasing co-ops are smaller businesses pooling their purchasing power to buy wholesale. Associated Grocers is a purchasing co-op that primarily serves thriftway stores, and it solves the problem of the larger players in the grocery industry, like Safeway, Thriftway, Albertsons, being able to buy in greater volume and get better prices. So when these smaller grocers pool their purchasing power, then they can be competitive. Same thing with Ace Hardware as an alternative to Home Depot and Lowe's having all of their purchasing power. A shared services co-op is a bunch of services providers who provide complementary services, and then they share an office, they share some infrastructure, they make referrals. You'll see this a lot of times with healthcare, and you also see it with, say, people who provide business services. So you may have a graphic designer and a marketing person, and they're sharing an office, and they work with a lot of the same clients together, and then they save overhead by paying rent together, say paying a receptionist together, sharing the cost of, say, a conference room. Housing co-ops, I know Sid mentioned that, solving the problem of rent costs being out of control. Electrical co-ops and utility co-ops are big in the Midwest, and a lot of times in remote rural areas, it's not cost effective for organizations that are primarily concerned with making money to reach these customers, especially for things like broadband. So if you form a cooperative where the purpose of the organization is actually to provide the service rather than to make money for the organization, you get something that benefits the people who participate in it. And then financial co-ops, credit unions, and they're solving the problem of the ways that the banking industry is dysfunctional and extractive. So, BECU is a credit union, and there are many others. But that's why you get, lower fees and just better terms all around when you're working with a credit union rather than with a for-profit traditional bank. So these are the cooperative principles that were defined, I believe it was by the International Cooperative Alliance, but I'm not positive. And these are the criteria, the things that make a co-op a co-op, what's interesting to me about this is that the first four are kind of practical. They're, about how it's organized, how it is run. The last three, the education, training, and information, cooperation among cooperatives, concern for community, I think those are more about cooperative DNA, because in a lot of ways what makes a co-op is that this is a way to hopefully contribute to making a better world. And that's what I think the last three principles are about. So for the history of the cooperative movement, this is all over the place, and I just picked a number of things. So I said there have always been co-ops in some form or another. So anytime people have tried to do business in ways that are mutually beneficial, that's a type of cooperative arrangement. I personally think that a lot of family-run businesses are cooperatives, even if they're not necessarily incorporated as cooperatives. But the modern co-op movement is generally thought to have started with the Rochdale Pioneers, who were a group of textile workers in England. In the 1840s, they weren't happy with they were kind of forced to buy their groceries at the company store. They didn't like the options, so they got together and they created their own food co-op. And I think what was really radical about what they did was how intentional they were about it. And so they defined co-ops. They created principles around co-ops, which are related to the cooperative principles I presented before, but not exactly the same. In African-American communities, there have been a lot of mutual aid societies and cooperative and solidarity economics. There's a great book about this called Collective Courage, Jessica Gordon-Nimhart, and highly recommended. Mondragon is, I think, the largest co-op in the world. It's in the Basque region of Spain. It is the 5th largest employer in Spain. And they do a bunch of different industries, mostly manufacturing, because it tends to be high wage. But it started with a study group with a Jesuit priest who wanted to find some solutions to people living in poverty and working in situations that didn't give them a path forward. And over the years, they have founded, in addition to all their businesses, which are interconnected, they have a school, they have a cooperative grocery, they have a bank. So it really is a whole cooperative infrastructure. And then the food co-op movement of the 1960s was also really instrumental. I think that's where co-ops kind of came into the mainstream in the U.S. at least, that a lot of people were founding co-ops to solve problems with the food system, and it kind of just built on itself. And then recently, I'd say in the last 20 years or so, people within the co-op movement have been recognizing that there are a ton of baby boomers with businesses who are exiting their businesses. And that is a really fertile opportunity to identify businesses that could become co-ops and work with owners who are exiting to make that happen. So that is known in co-op circles as the silver tsunami. Actually. So why start a co-op? As I mentioned, you're solving a problem through collective entrepreneurship. You're building a better kind of economy that's much more human-centric. And it's great to collaborate. I mean, there's just this synergy that you get with people really working together well when this is working together well. So if you are interested in starting a co-op, I think the very first step is to figure out your vision. Why do you want to start a co-op? A lot of co-ops have, a big, bold, egalitarian vision. Some co-ops just, they want to start a business, and it seems like a good way to do it. There is no single right way to do it, but yeah.
Can you be able to send this slide?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely send out the slides. So if you know your why, then it's much easier to organize everything that you do around it and have that be a reference point. Then you want to find your people. Sometimes a group of people decide they want to start a co-op together. So it starts with the people, and then it goes out from there to the business. You choose your industry, and sometimes people know exactly what industry they want to be in. Sometimes, like with Mondragon, the one in the Basque region of Spain, they knew they wanted to create something. They didn't know what industry it was going to be until they got started and got more clear about their vision. Okay, then you want to create your bylaws or your operating agreement, which is really your guiding documents. If you're forming a cooperative corporation, which is one business structure that you can use for co-ops, you're going to use bylaws. If you're founding your co-op as an LLC, you can just have an operating agreement, which is simpler, but the fact that it's simpler shouldn't be a reason not to use it as a way to really think through what you want in your co-op and how it's going to operate. Then you're going to create a business entity, and we'll talk more about the different business entities that work for cooperative arrangements. And of course, keep learning, because there's always more to learn about it. No matter how much you know about it, you can always know more. And, the learning is from connecting with resources, but the learning is also from the day-to-day of what you're doing. So for bylaws and operating agreements, this is just an overview of some questions that you're going to want this document to answer or outline. Again, we start with the purpose and the vision. How are you going to admit members? If it's a worker co-op, do they need to work there for a certain amount of time before you admit them? And if you admit them, almost always existing members will vote on bringing in new members, and in my co-op, it has to be unanimous, because if just one person doesn't want somebody there, it has the potential to kind of take things apart. I'm not saying, that's not the only way to do it. That's how we tend to do it. You want to outline how you're going to make decisions, and we'll get much more into that in a little bit. How will you manage money? And that has to do, bylaws should say whether you're using cash or accrual accounting, but also if there are idiosyncrasies to how your business operates financially, how are you going to work that in? How are you going to create a frame that sets your business up for success? And then, of course, everyone's co-op is going to be great and everyone's going to love each other all the time, but let's say it isn't working. So how are you going to expel somebody? And, of course, you want that to be both fair and expedient, because if you're in a situation with someone and it's getting toxic, it affects everybody's morale. How will you pay out members who are leaving? You want to do that in a way that is fair to the people who have invested in the co-op, but you also want to make sure that you don't pay out so much so fast that it stresses the business financially. And then how are you going to update your bylaws or your operating agreement? Is it good, do you do it once a year? Do you need a majority vote on it? Do you need 3/4 vote on it? So all of these things you're going to outline in the bylaws. And the bylaws should be a living, breathing document. Just because you created this way doesn't mean it needs to stay that way. And of course, you're going to be creating the bylaws before you're actually operating as a co-op. So there are so many things you can't foresee. So that's why you should treat it as a living, breathing document and go back and adjust things when you see a need to do so. So for business structures for a cooperative, first of all, the business structure that a co-op is formed with is actually a separate question from how you manage it and govern it as a co-op. I mean, it's related, but they are two separate things. You can form a co-op as a cooperative corporation. My producer co-op that we formed during COVID, we formed it as a mutual benefit corporation, which is almost a nonprofit, but it's not a 501c3. You can also form a co-op as an LLC, which is easier to form, but that shouldn't be the main reason for forming it as an LLC. Another good reason to form it as an LLC is that undocumented people can be business owners, but often can't be employees. So that way you can bring them into the mix as well. So for decision making, again, your bylaws, your operating agreement is a way to lay out how your co-op is going to make decisions. And this is important because it's so deeply connected to what makes a co-op a co-op. With, say, large co-ops like PCC, REI, the extent of member participation in decision-making is voting for board members who then make decisions. But in smaller co-ops, often it's full-on consensus. You can also set up a voting structure where you can vote a majority vote for particular changes. It's also useful to specify what types of decisions you're making collaboratively and which types of decisions you might relegate to smaller groups. For example, there's a structure that I've seen some co-ops use called holacracy, where each department is an autonomous group, and they democratically will make decisions. They may use consensus, but their domain is their domain. And then there are other, and these are mostly operational decisions. And then bigger picture decisions can be made by the co-op as a whole. Useful to keep in mind, collaborative decision-making can be cumbersome. It definitely takes longer than, just having one person who makes a decision and goes for it. It doesn't hurt to have something in the bylaws about how to expedite decision-making in situations where time is of the essence. And I think that takes a lot of trust. But it's good to have it in there. I've heard a lot of people in co-op circles talk about hierarchies of experience versus structural hierarchies. Now, structural hierarchies are what you have in a traditional business where the manager has the absolute say. And so that's built in that the decision-making will be made that way. Hierarchy of experience is more like where some people have been doing this longer and know more about it. And so when people defer to them because they know more, and again, this takes a lot of trust as well. I think it takes people being willing to step aside and maybe not have their voice weigh quite as heavily if there's somebody else talking who has more experience with this and more knowledge of it. Fist to 5 is a tool for gauging agreement when you're working with consensus. So everybody will either indicate with a show of their hand and the position of their hand how much they agree with a particular decision under discussion. So a fist means I'm not into it. 5 means I'm fully in agreement, and the other fingers leading up to 5. How much in agreement with it you are, short of being fully in agreement. Okay, now co-op marketing. I found this really interesting. The National Cooperative Bank did research on marketing cooperatives, and they found that 90% of consumers would rather support a cooperative business than a non-cooperative business, assuming that the price and the quality are equal. Now, the tricky thing about this is that most people, even the 90% who would rather support a cooperative business, don't know what a cooperative is. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there with marketing to talk about the nature of cooperatives, why cooperatives are awesome, how they work behind the scenes. Also, there have been various movements towards cooperatives coming together and marketing together. And, that's another thing that it would be pretty awesome to have more of. So for the business of co-ops, some co-ops are co-ops first and businesses second. It's like people get together, they say, I want to have a co-op. These are the people I want to start it with. Let's figure out something that we can do cooperatively. Some co-ops are businesses first and co-ops second. Now, my co-op, Patty Pan Cooperative, I'd say that we're a business first and a co-op second, and partly because we're a conversion co-op. We started with an existing business, and we put our heads down, we get the work done. We don't have a ton of meetings. And there's no right way to do this. It's whatever works for your co-op. The main thing is that people don't feel like they're shut out of decision-making. I mean, we do a lot of our decision-making just during day-to-day work conversations that happen, rather than always setting aside the time for the meeting. It's not a perfect system, but it's what we do. When you're thinking about co-ops as businesses, I think a really important thing to keep in mind is that values-based business models work best when the business fundamentals are sound. In other words, you can't share profit surplus if you don't have any. So, you want to get everybody engaged in working on the business. And we'll talk more about that as well. I think in a co-op, ideally, you're going to create a positive feedback loop where the members take care of the business so that the business can take care of the members. You want to get away from that zero-sum game that you see so often in traditional businesses, where if the employees earn more, the owner earns less. Really, if the employees are earning more, in a perfect world, they would also be doing better work so that the business earns more and everybody's happy. Again, I think the engagement that comes with cooperative decision-making sets a co-op up for better decisions, because you have more voices, you have a broader perspective, you have people in every aspect of the business who are paying attention to what's going on and working on making things better. So one tricky thing that often comes into play, especially with worker co-ops, is training people to think like owners. For example, say you're working, you have a job where you leave at 5. You leave at 5 no matter what, even if the work isn't done. I think in a co-op, you'll be much more engaged with the fact that, yeah, your schedule says you're going to leave at 5, but there's an order that needs to go out the door tomorrow. And if you don't get the order out the door, then there's less revenue, and that's going to affect you as well. So yeah, it's a different kind of thinking, and I think that people sometimes kind of grasp this intellectually, but it doesn't always carry over into their work all the time. And I think it's just about patiently reminding people and just finding ways to reinforce that. With my co-op, I think it took us a good 5 or 6 years before people really began to think and work this way. Now, one tool to steer co-op members towards thinking about owners called open book management. And open book management is when basically you share the books. So everybody knows how the business is doing financially. But it's not just a matter of putting financial statements in front of people who have no experience looking at financial statements. It's also a matter of training people to look at what's important in that financial statement, to understand it, to connect it to the work that they're doing day to day. And sometimes this is a matter of even creating simplified versions of financial statements that really focus in on the things that are going to be most relevant. And if you can get that down, then you can collaborate with your members to improve those numbers, which is in everybody's best interests. So compensation for worker co-ops. If you're structured as a cooperative corporation, then you're all going to be employees. Then all of the member owners are going to be employees of the cooperative. I've seen LLCs where people get a share of the surplus at the end of the year and they can draw on it throughout the year. This usually happens with arrangements where a business isn't earning enough to actually pay people a living wage. And again, the focusing on the business fundamentals can really help with this. And you can do that with an LLC. You can't do that, say, with a cooperative corporation where you are an employee of the corporation, of the co-op. If you're an employee, you have to earn at least minimum wage. So in addition to your wage or salary, you're going to get surplus. And again, surplus is another word for profit sharing. It is what is left over after subtracting out all of the business expenses from the business revenue. One interesting thing that my co-op has run into over and over again is that the higher people's wages, the lower the surplus. Because wages are a business expense. And if you're subtracting a larger amount from your revenue, you're going to have less left over to distribute at the end of the day. I think my co-op members tend to prefer getting a raise every year anyway because it's guaranteed. But on the flip side, if you're getting surplus rather than wages, you also get the benefits of having that money being taxed at a more advantageous rate than your wages or salary. First of all, because there's no Social Security, and second of all, you're avoiding that double taxation on it. So yeah, patronage payments have tax benefits. When there is surplus that is divided among co-op members, you have a lot of decisions to make around how that's going to be done. You can either pay it out, or you could not pay it out if the business needs extra money to cover its cash flow. You can allocate it and say that each person has earned this money, but you're not giving it to them yet. And when you do that, you keep the money in, it's called internal capital accounts, or ICAs. Some businesses create separate accounts for each person's internal capital accounts. Some businesses will just kind of keep a running total of how much each person owns. And then some co-op businesses will pay out returned earnings, say, after a given period of time, like 2 or 3 years. And some will pay them out when somebody leaves. Some will pay them out if there's a cash surplus. I think that when deciding how much of a surplus is given out to members and how much is retained, it's also really useful to take a co-op's debt load into account, because the principal that you pay on a debt doesn't figure into your profit and loss, but it's still money that has to go out the door. So I like to think of what's available to distribute as the profit minus the loan principal that's been paid out. And also, pay equity is complex. I mean, I heard somebody talking about this while we were waiting to get started. Pay equity means different things to different people. And I think if you understand what you're talking about and kind of what your definitions are and what your values are and what you're hoping to achieve with your pay scale, it's much easier to get a pay equity arrangement that everybody can be on board with. So some things to think about when you think about a pay equity. There's equality, which, some co-ops pay everybody the same. There's performance. What if some people do a better job than others? You would think that, they should get paid more. There's the issue of unpaid contributions. A lot of times when you're starting a co-op, there are people who are involved in the founding who do a lot of work that they never got compensated for. Do you want your pay structure to somehow reflect that? And then there's commitment. Your refrigeration goes down, you get a notification in the middle of the night. Who's going to wake up and go to the shop and put everything in ice chests, and that kind of thing. It's, do you compensate people more for having more of a commitment and really acting like they have more skin in the game? Then there's the issue of seniority. The people who have been with the co-op longer and have been doing this work longer, do they get paid more? Again, that's fair, but it's not fair if your vision of fairness is paying everybody the same. There's also the issue of earning potential outside the co-op. Let's say you have a food service business. People in the food service industry tend to make less per hour than people with a lot of professional type jobs. So if somebody could earn 4 times as much as they'd earn per hour doing graphic design or web development, do you really want to pay everybody the same? And if you're paying them more, how do you get everybody on board with that? And again, there are no right and wrong answers here, but I think the main thing is if you're clear about what your assumptions are, and you're clear about what your goals are, then it's much easier to find an arrangement that really does feel equitable to more people. Now, when people become a member of a co-op, they contribute a buy-in, and that buy-in basically gives them a slice of the pie. Co-op buy-ins should be refundable if somebody leaves, but you may want to work out arrangement that should be articulated in your bylaws or operating agreement for how and when, like what is the timeline for paying somebody out. You don't want to have an arrangement where if everybody left at once or if like 3 people left at once, you would be left with no cash. That's bad for the business. My co-op, our bylaws say that we have 5 years to buy somebody out. But so far, every single time somebody's left, we've bought them out all at once. You know, it's cleaner. There's a lot less paperwork, but we also want to leave ourselves the possibility that if we don't have the cash to buy somebody out right away, we're not legally obligated to do that. And then a co-op buy-in should be enough for people to have skin in the game, but not enough to create a barrier to entry. One person who founded it was a conversion co-op in Maine. They do construction, and he defined it as the price for a worker co-op, the price of a good used car, which is a lot more than it used to be. But I think it's just a good way to frame it. It's it's a real expense, but it's not like buying a house. My co-op, when we first started, our buy-in was $1. And again, we didn't want to create a barrier to entry. We ended up with some people who really couldn't care less. It was just so easy that they did it. So after 4 or 5 years, we changed it. Now it's $1,000, which, is not nothing. You can set up an arrangement to spread payments for a buy-in over a reasonable time frame. For example, you can do it as a 5% paycheck deduction. You could do $50 per paycheck. You just set it up in a way that doesn't hurt too much for people to buy in. So I went over a lot of this already. Surplus is what you have left at the end of the accounting period after you subtract the expenses from the revenue. And then you collectively decide how much of it you're going to pay out, how much you're going to retain. The funds that you retain can either belong to the members or they can belong to the co-op. For example, if they go towards paying loan principal, then that belongs to the co-op. And then track it through internal capital accounts and decide how you're going to pay out what you have in the internal capital accounts. I've also seen co-ops that do this. You have the internal capital accounts and people can ask for money if they need it. And then you have the books that you can reference and see whether the business can actually afford to do this at this point. So a lot of times co-ops are confused with ESOPs. ESOP stands for Employee Stock Option Plan. And, I even had somebody say to me just the other day, I shop at Winco because it's a co-op. Winco is employee-owned, but it's employee-owned through an ESOP. It's not a co-op. And same with like Bob's Red Mill and even like Fat Tire Brewing Company is an ESOP, but not a co-op. A co-op is easier and less expensive to create. And it's built into a co-op's DNA that there is shared decision-making. An ESOP tends to be expensive and complicated to create, and the decision-making may or may not be shared. Now, I know the Fat Tire Brewing Company, it's not a co-op, but the owners are really engaged with the decision-making. So again, how you handle the decision-making, it's just however you want to do it. I suspect that anybody here who is starting is more likely to start a co-op than an ESOP, just because it's so complicated and so expensive. But again, I'm just calling this out here because it's something that comes up so often in conversations about co-ops. Now, conversion co-op is when you take an existing business and you change it into a co-op. The previous owner, the person who founded it, may stay with the business or they may leave. I think with my business, I was the founder. I stayed with it. You stayed with it. A lot of the conversion co-ops I know of, the owners do stay with it. And there, you really run into that dynamic where there's the tension between structural hierarchies and hierarchies of experience. Because if you've founded this business, you know it inside and out in a way that your employees don't, even if they have been with it for a long time. I mean, they've never had the experience of like lying awake all night worrying about cash flow. But as a sole owner, you're so tied into it. And ideally, if this works well, then as an owner transitioning to being one of a group of members, you also have enough respect from the people who are becoming your business partners that they're going to respect your word. So your vote won't necessarily be a vote that weighs more heavily, but the input you have around decisions might weigh more heavily just because you've been doing it longer, so you know more. And usually with a conversion co-op, the new business entity will buy the business from the old business entity. And that's something that co-ops often get financing with. Mike with Shared Capital, they do a lot of work around this. So you get a loan and you pay out the exiting owner, and then at that point, they own a share just like everybody else. Yeah, my business, I actually, instead of borrowing from outside, I extended a loan to a co-op so that way I get the interest rather than a bank getting the interest. There's advantages and disadvantages to doing it that well. I know of other co-ops like Real Pickles in Massachusetts. They did an outside fundraising campaign to get the money to buy the business from the founders. And there are multi-stakeholder co-ops, and those are owned and run by multiple groups of stakeholders. Central Co-op started out as a consumer co-op, and then in, I think, 2016 or 2017, they converted to being a multi-stakeholder co-op. So they are both a worker-owned co-op and a consumer co-op. And both sets of stakeholders weigh in, they're on the board, they weigh in decision-making. This is not easy to execute. That's why I have a unicorn up there. Basically, sometimes it's hard enough to get agreement from a single group of stakeholders. We have multiple groups of stakeholders. They may just have different priorities. So again, it's really useful to define what are the priorities that are shared by the different groups of stakeholders. And I would think the main one is you take care of the co-op so that the co-op can take care of the members. And then there's just some Seattle area worker co-ops that I just wrote down off the top of my head, and I noticed as I looked over it that almost all of them are conversion co-ops. Does this mean that we have a disproportionate amount of conversion co-ops? I don't know. Just an observation. Then, we think of co-ops as closely owned and run. I heard one time, don't quote me on this, but I think the average worker co-op has 8 to 10 members. But you can scale a co-op to hundreds or even thousands of members. You have Mondragon in the Basque region of Spain. Equal Exchange is a worker co-op that also purchases from producer co-ops. They're a reasonably big business. And then Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx. They're also, I think they're the largest worker-owned cooperative in this country. And home care is an excellent industry for worker co-ops because you have that tension there where people pay a lot for the service, but the workers put their hearts and soul into the work and they don't earn nearly enough. And so when the owners and the workers are the same, you can do some work towards bridging that tension. So some of the challenges you run into with a co-op, lending institutions, sometimes they just don't understand who they're lending to. I've seen a lot of co-ops where some member will basically guarantee a loan, provide a personal guarantee for a loan for the co-op because that's what the lending institution requires, and somebody may be better able to do that than somebody else. Is that equitable? It depends how you look at it. You know, this person happened to have those resources. At the same time, this person is putting more in than their coworkers. So again, you know, just framing it that way to show that equity is really complex. Also, there are noteworthy exceptions, and there are organizations that are specifically geared towards lending to co-ops, such as shared capital. Another cooperative challenge is that shared decision-making can be cumbersome, that it takes longer to make the decisions when you have to get buy-in from more people. But again, you can devise solutions like trying to set things up so that decisions that need to be made quickly can be made with an expedited process. And running a co-op also requires education and training around business ownership, and there are a lot of great resources for that. So I don't remember who this quote is from, so I just attributed it to some smart person. But basically the point here is that every co-op is different, like a snowflake. You know, what are your needs? What are your objectives? You know, and how can you bring that into how you set up your co-op? And also, the solutions that work for a different co-op may or may not be the solutions that work for your co-op. So, some resources: the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, based in Olympia. They do great work. U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops is an organization that specifically works with and for worker co-ops. Shared cap.
So you maybe like some forms of healthcare existing.
Yeah. Do they have full-on healthcare now? I know it was dental when, yeah. Yeah, and they provide a ton of resources also. You know, they have a lot of webinars, they train people and stuff, and they also do some technical assistance. Shared capital, of course, there's lending for cooperatives. Northwest Agriculture Business Center, they do technical assistance. They work more with producer cooperatives, but that's one of their main focuses, and people's community law, because there are legal issues that come up with co-ops. Okay, there we go. That's what I got.
Thank you, Devra. So next we're gonna just kind of run through our other resource providers. We're gonna give a little bit of information about what they provide, and then we'll open it up for discussion. But I guess we'll just go down the row and start with you, Caleb. You're gonna introduce yourself and what y'all do.
Sure, yeah. My name is Kaleb Hoeffgen. I'm with the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. The center has been around for roughly 40 years. If there has been a co-op in the Northwest in Washington, Oregon, or Idaho, you may have had some head in it. We service everything from worker co-ops to multi-stakeholder to, in some instances, food cooperatives. We have a very robust home care associates program, actually. We started 6 home care workers agencies in the state of Washington alone. Our housing co-op, well, that's another co-op we service. Our housing co-op, it's not necessarily a department, but people who do it have also started over 31 different resident-owned manufactured housing projects, meaning that there are manufactured housing projects here within the state of Washington. There's a right to sell or right to refuse law within the state of Washington, and then the people who own the houses have an opportunity to purchase the land in shared agreement. And there's 31 of those in the state. It's kind of like a little bit of a quiet trend there. We have over 19 different developers all over the 3 states, and our work is very robust. We also have a number of academies. So one of the biggest things that we do outside of our technical assistance is also education. So we do startups. So as we do a startup academy, we just had that. We just launched our conversion academy, in which we had conversion owners who were part of that. I call it 77,000, number of businesses in the U.S. That number in Washington must be relatively large too. Those people come to us, come to the Conversion Academy, and then they participate not with just the owners themselves, but the sellers, and they kind of work together to figure out what the conversion might look like, and then they can become potential clients afterwards. And then we also have a home care academy as well that has its own line of education. Lastly, we also do some basic, sometimes policy work and stuff like that around like some housing support and stuff. So you might see some of our members, for instance, our director was on the commission for SB 1596 that came out of some of the policy shaping around cooperative law in the state of Washington.
All right. Oh, I've got one. I'm wearing one already. Oh, maybe Mike. Yeah, so as you know, I'm a co-op lawyer, and I've had a practice for about 2 years, really focus on cooperative law in particular. In order to do this work as a sole practitioner, I do work in community with a lot of other attorneys. I'm a member of something called the Cooperative Professionals Guild, which is national, so we have folks all over the place, and we meet together and talk about, issues that we're seeing, look at where we can help to advocate for, better financing, new ways that we can look at how we can do co-op financing, how we can maybe get SEC to relax some of the rules a little bit so it's a little easier to do community raising for capital, things like that. I'm also a fellow with the Sustainable Economies Law Center in Oakland, California, and we also similarly, learn together and share information and sort of help each other figure out, how we can best navigate certain issues, because that quote that was up is so true. And not only is it that, if you've seen one co-op, you've seen one co-op, but the way that cooperatives intersect with the laws, and so many different laws, depending on what they're doing, can be extremely complex. And I do think that's the place where there is, I think that's not understood sometimes very well, because, when you're doing a cooperative, you're really interested, right, in these relationships and what is this beautiful thing that you're creating. And it's kind of hard to be also in the headspace of, well, what about when things go wrong? How are we going to protect certain things for when things do go wrong? Because you don't really want to be in that headspace when you're creating something and you're really doing those positive interactions. That's kind of the important role, like why you need some legal help, is to see where are those intersections, where are the problems that we've seen. And this is why we talk together a lot, because a lot of folks doing co-op law get kind of called in when there's a problem. Like, oh my God, this thing is imploding, there's this problem happening, and then they want the lawyers to help fix it. And so this is why it is important to try to have, at least legal review of things that you're doing, because Washington is a very flexible state. We've got lots of ways you can create a co-op statutorily, but that means that you also need to follow certain things about that statute. It's not just a free-for-all in terms of your bylaws. There are things that need to be complied with. This kind of issue between what you decide sort of on the fly, on a daily basis, versus when you are starting to breach into a decision that actually has to be made by the board legally, or you could have problems down the line. Those are the types of things that we help you navigate. And I kind of tell clients, especially as a worker co-op, sometimes you're wearing multiple hats, right? You're a worker, there are worker laws applying to you, you're a member, so then you've got the member hat, and then maybe you're also on the board, so you're wearing a board hat. And you kind of actually have to sometimes think between that, well, this is happening, this is the hat like that I have to wear right now to think about where does this decision go next. So that's the kind of thing that I try to help people with, is really trying to map out where these decision points are and how to move between them. In terms of affordability, I really try to be flexible with, I do work with the Co-op Development Center. We do joint grants sometimes. I actually, I have grants available sometimes through Sustainable Economies Law Center for, an entity that's really doesn't have the funds to pay for an attorney. But the other way I do that is to do what I call like flat rate packages, where so there's a number, like when you're forming, there's a number of different sort of legal documents and pieces that need to be reviewed. But I can do that as, this would be the entire flat rate for it, and payments can be made over time, so that it's not an hourly where, suddenly if it goes over, we hit a snag and there's many more hours that have to be put in, you're not having to pay hourly. It's just one rate regardless of how many hours maybe we get caught up in something that takes more time, and paying those out in payments. One thing I caught earlier that I just want to clarify, and I'm just going to put in a plug here for your conference, the conference in August, because it's going to be a 2-day conference. I'm going to do a whole session, I think. It's a proposal that's in, and I believe it will probably get approved. I'm going to do a whole Co-op 101 session there, which I think will be helpful if you're, venturing in this way. But just to be clear about ESOPs, they are really for large entities. Like there has to be it's a very big volume of revenue, so it's not even a question if you're a smaller co-op as to which way you're going there. I mean, an ESOP is really only applicable for certain large entities. Okay, I could go on, but I will end there. There you go.
My name is Mike. I'm based in Seattle, like you guys. My organization, Share Capital, we are a nationwide organization, so we are investing into any kind of co-ops in the United States. We are a community development financial institution. CDFI is a kind of certification from Federal Department of Treasury. So some mission-oriented bank, they ask for this kind of certification so that we can have more robust impact framework. So there are 1,400 CDFIs out there, but we are only 6 out of 1,400 CDFI that invest into co-ops. So like Devra said, the lending institution, they kind of sleep on co-ops. So we are also one and only CDFI that is a co-op. So we are also a co-op of cooperatives. So we are owned by more than 300 co-ops out there, just like you guys. So we are owned and governed by co-ops, meaning that I don't have any decision authority. So I'm meeting our potential borrower and I'm helping them refine their business case, and we can pitch that case to our investment committee, which is composed of 10 or 12 co-ops, just like you. So kind of borrower making decision for other borrower, like a self-help model. So it's truly democratic. And also when we have a surplus, we redistribute the surplus to our members. So if you pay interest last year to us, then based on the interest amount, we give out the patronage. So for example, last year, we had some surplus, so we gave out $20K back to the members. So essentially, it's kind of 10% of their interest cost of the last year. So they actually end up paying only 90% of their contract interest, which is kind of a good deal. So we are a co-op serving co-op. So I think there's a reason why we structured this way, because again, there is co-ops are so different. So we do have some like standard loan product, but we always end up like customizing our loan product to serve you better, because like every co-op has a different like financing needs. So we really want to accommodate the co-op's financing needs. So that's why we are co-op. So we are willing to sit down with you and talk through every single details that you want to talk through. So we are very patient and accommodating. So yeah. So our interest rate is anywhere between 5 to 8%, and our loan amount is ranging from $5,000 to $2 million, and it can be as short as 6 months. It can be as long as 10 years. So that's kind of our line. So yeah.
Thank you all.